Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. The world is shaken by the monumental decision that basically at this moment separates the world before the tariffs that came out from the United States and the world that we have after Donald Trump's team has announced the tariffs, or more specifically, Donald Trump himself, because he's touting this as this is his main promise on the campaign and he's delivering that promise. Now, let's just say that the reactions to these tariffs are wild. But there are certain things that you should know. So let's talk about these tariffs. And we're going to start by the headlines. For example, The Economist is stating that Donald Trump has committed the most profound, harmful, and unnecessary economic error in the modern era. Almost everything he said on history, economics, and the technicalities of trade was utterly deluded. Not a very strong start here for Donald Trump, apparently, as we see along. And the markets responded quite appropriately. Pretty much all across the world, we see world economy pretty much going down because it is very clear that there is a lot of compound and complex mechanisms that allow the world economy to work. So introduction of something that's vast, of like global tariffs on the one of the main, if not the main country in the world trading, it's definitely going to hurt. But I want to caution everyone because market indexes are not a very good predictor if they can be considered a predictor at all. So charts like these, while they're pretty good for the memes and looking that, wow, Trump's actions are really causing some influx and US stock markets losing like over a couple of trillion of dollars in an instant, in a bigger sense, you shouldn't be looking too much into this except for a couple of chuckles. The market is doing what the market is doing. There's like a whole plethora of complex mechanisms, but the most important thing, it's not a predictor of how bad we're doing or how bad we will be doing or how good we are doing and how good we will be doing. That's not the point of the market indexes. But the economists pretty much all across the world, minus certain economists that are close to Trump, have been saying pretty much one thing and one thing only. For example, here is a reaction of one of the professors in economics on the announcement of these tariffs, and I think it was very, very nicely captured by France 24.
Economies. Let's cross back to Professor Scott Lucas, Professor of US and International Politics. Scott, we spoke to you a little bit earlier. Now that we've heard what the detail is from Donald Trump, what do you make of all of that?
Before talking about the effects, and they're bad, let me just say that I think that was the dumbest, most economically illiterate speech I have heard in my life. And I've heard a lot of bad ones. It was filled with lies and distortions, and I need to back that up. For example, the idea that the European Union has a 39% tariff rate on the United States. The weighted average of EU tariffs on the US is 1%.
Yeah, obviously he was professor of the international politics in US, but I think he understands at least this deep into what the tariffs are and how they work. And the tariffs are vast, so vast, in fact, that they are capturing and tariffing some areas that not a lot of people were expecting. For example, a nice catch in all of that list was that people have seen that Heard and McDonald, oh, sorry, let me move myself up a little bit. So Heard and McDonald Islands were tariffed at 10% for the trade. And the irony of that statement is, well, because when you look up what a Heard and McDonald Islands are, this is the picture that you find. It's a wasteland. There is nothing there. There's just penguins that are standing there in their fancy suits that probably they didn't have to pay tariffs for. Well, now they do. So there's a lot of things that are indicating that this is not super well thought through. But you know what is very peculiar indeed is that while the penguin inhabitant wastelands do get tariffed, a country that is particularly absent is Russia. Yes. So while everyone in the world and everything that you might know of or don't know of gets tariffs on literally whatever they do, Russia gets a free pass. More importantly, as mentioned here by Michael McFaul, the I believe he was ambassador to Russia, and he states that on the day that Trump sanctioned every ally of the United States in the world, his team made special arrangements for the head of Russian sovereign fund to visit DC, and Russia was one of the few countries in the world not hit by new tariffs today. I hope the American people get an explanation for this. Well, I'm pretty sure we won't. Well, I'm not an American, but I'm pretty sure Americans will not hear an explanation. But yes, it is true. Dmitriev went to DC to talk with Witkoff about Russian, well, it's presented as a Russian peace plan. But the main and important thing that you need to know about Dmitriev, he's not a political discussion guy. He is not there to discuss the sanctions. Dmitriev is representing the economic bloc of the Russian negotiations. And Dmitriev, like, he's as a butcher, as a thief, and a war criminal as they come. So US had to essentially force them, other departments, to lift specifically sanctions so the visa gets issued to Dmitriev, and then he is able to come to US to meet with Witkoff, and I'm going to guarantee you they were not talking about how to get the deal with the peace negotiations in Ukraine. They were mostly talking about how much money they can make with Russia and maybe Witkoff and Trump. That's 100,000%. I haven't heard anything, obviously, from that meeting, but you don't need to hear anything to completely and clearly understand who these people are and what they're going to be discussing. But the EUS doesn't stop there, because while sanctioning or tariffing, whatever you want to call it, the Penguin Islands and other weird places is bad enough, a lot of the question marks were raised on what are these percentages that Trump has presented in those weird charts, because they have nothing to do with reality, as you've heard the professor said from France 24. And it turns out that it is as stupid or even stupider than you were imagining, because people were able to find out, and it was actually verified, that the White House used the formula for trading goods to find out what tariff rate they need to do. So what they took is, like, they take our trade deficit of goods for our country, and then our goods imports, then we kind of put one against another, and then we get a score, and then we halve that score, and then we get our tariff rate. It is so idiotic that, as headline states, Trump's idiotic and flawed tariff calculations is just stunning economists worldwide. It has nothing to do with reality. And most importantly, it only takes into account goods, but not services. So their calculation doesn't even include services in it. This is basically the meme, that is incarnate. Everyone is just baffled. What the fuck US is doing? And to be honest, I don't think if I can really explain to you if there isn't a kernel of logic here. I have a suspicion though, because I looked into some of the announcements and I tried to find out where the fascination of Trump with tariffs was. And then I stumbled upon this. So there was on the White House published in July of 2024, tariffs as a major revenue source, implications for distribution and growth. I'm going to link the article if you want to read it. But most importantly, like to kind of visually represent, I found out this chart and then I looked into it. So it turns out, and I'm sorry that for me it's a revelation, it's probably for you maybe it was obvious if you studied this, I didn't that much, but it turned out that at the start of 1800s, tariffs were the major source of income for the US federal government to get the revenue from tariffs around the 1800s. So when Trump says tariffs are so amazing, going to make us so rich, he is thinking specifically around that period, the period of 1800s, the Gilded Age, when the wealth was so consolidated in just a couple of people's hands. And I guess for Trump, it makes sense now for me why he's so fascinated with that century specifically and why he says he wants to make America great again, because Gilded Age is just bringing in his fascinations. So what you need to understand with this chart, look, United States now is a rich country. There is a question to be made whether or not this wealth is distributed equally among the people of the United States or not. It's not, but hear me out. The point is that there is a reason why this chart goes downwards and not upwards, and why we don't see major spikes later on to these tariffs. And US has been prospering significantly. If you look at the chart, then tariffs almost become non-existent around 1950s, 1960s. This is when US opens up to Europe. This is when US creates these allies that the freeloaders, if you would believe J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth's discussions with regards to what US has been doing and how free riding is. And during that time, when US had little to no tariffs almost to anyone, there was a big prosperity for US. While the revenues were kind of high in this, and if you look at the chart, you're like, maybe have like a weird, sneaky suspicion about, hey, maybe tariffs are actually not that bad. Maybe they can have an influence on how rich the country is. Maybe tariffs can get us richer. Well, the only thing you need to do, and we're going to overlay this one on another, is to look at the real GDP chart. A real GDP is basically a chart showing, well, how rich United States is. It's not fully accurate, the data is not fully accurate, but it's showing you the general picture. And if you see where we are right now, yes, this is how rich United States is. This is here. I cannot show you with other countries, but you see the point. US is exponentially growing, and it has been exponentially growing since approximately 1940s, 1950s. Surprising to absolutely no one, it was exactly when US embraced the no tariffs and embraced the free trade. And free trade with the freeloaders is what made US not just rich, it made US stupidly rich. Insanely stupidly rich. Because for Trump, he looks at the chart number 1, and he doesn't look at the chart number 2 that doesn't even start to scratch the surface of how much, more importantly, like how little actual wealth there was in United States, and just how much US gained by not having any trade barriers. And Trump says, that's too bad. Let's go all the way back. And this is already having real and profound consequences. I told you we should not look too much into the market indexes, but what you should look at is what decisions are being made on the global level for different parties involved into this weird situation. Europeans are pushing not to buy American arms, and Americans suddenly are surprised by it and stating, well, why don't you want to buy American arms? And it is because of the Trump's administration's actions. Because Trump's temper tantrum, where he forced to switch off the anti-radar systems on the Ukrainian F-16s to push Ukraine into some kind of a ceasefire, which, by the way, super fucking failed. That temper tantrum basically showed that US is an untrusted ally. Now, with additional steps forward, it's showing again that US is a non-trusted ally. That means you cannot have the trusting relation. You cannot rely on the United States. So all of the discussions about whether or not dollar should be the world reserve currency, whether or not the country should enter some kind of other negotiating blocks, whether or not we should even invest into United States from Europe at all. All of these discussions are now surfacing and are being discussed on the top level. The damage that Trump is doing to United States is long-lasting, and hearing people talking about this, I have a nagging sensation that people in the United States still are not fully grasping just what is happening and how devastating it is for the world order and, most importantly, for US at large. Because what Trump is proposing is stating, I will remove all of those that we made trade relationships with, and I will make America great again. So now we talked about tariffs, and I needed to talk about, because it's literally dividing the timeline of the world by this point, the things that were happening while the US was in this situation, and now the world that is after that. But I want to underscore that things are not looking good for Russia as well. While Russia is not being hit by the tariffs, they are not having a good time at all. As you know, their economy is struggling. They are having real serious issues with their economy, and they were really reliant on their oil sales. And now they got two major kind of news here just recently. First one is that either sanctions or Ukrainian kinetic sanctions are working. Year on year, Russia's oil and gas revenues fell 17% compared to the previous year. So whatever was happening during the last year, it was working and it's damaging Russia, and 17% is a noticeable drop for Russia. And second thing is, there was a meeting of OPEC Plus, and finally the thing that Russia was trying to prevent a lot, like they put a lot of hard work to try to prevent it, but the thing that they wanted to prevent, unfortunately for them, has finally happened. The OPEC Plus agreed to increase the oil output from OPEC Plus countries. So this cartel finally decided to output. And initially they were aiming to increase the output to 135,000 barrels per day. But in their decision, they actually decided that it's going to be much, much more. It's going to be 411,000 barrels per day. So there's going to be significantly more oil on the market. And this is a problem for Russia because Russia needs high oil prices. A lot more oil, just regular market forces, more supply, therefore the prices will just naturally go down. Russia really tried to keep it up and prevent it for as long as they could, but I guess by this point they kind of said like, okay, Russia, no. Whether we're doing this with you or without you, decide whether you want to stay still in cartel or you not. But we're doing it anyways. And it's going from 135 barrels that were expected to actually 411,000 barrels per day. Great news and a really bad news for Russia. And I want to finish this video by giving you an updated perspective on the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Except it's not going to be me that's going to be presenting that. It's going to be the United States European Command Supreme Commander Christopher Cavalli. He just participated in a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, and he talked about what is the situation in Ukraine and how he sees it. The things that he's saying is word for word exactly what I have been telling you so far. We're having here a unique opportunity. With me and this channel, we're talking about how the situation on the ground is looking up for Ukraine. And now from a completely different source, there is a different person is talking about how the situation is on the ground in Ukraine. And I truly believe that you will find a lot of crossing points. So enjoy the next couple of minutes, and I'm going to wrap it up right after.
General Cavalli, it appears that the Russians and President Putin are engaged in what they consider a kind of waiting game, a grinding down in the conflict in Ukraine. Are the Ukrainians destined to lose?
No, Senator. Thank you for the question, because I think it's an important one. There's nothing inevitable in war. And the Ukrainians are in very strong defensive positions right now and are improving weekly their ability to generate force and to reinforce those positions. It is hard sitting here right now to envision a major Ukrainian offensive that clears everybody, out of every square inch of Ukraine. But likewise, it's very hard to envision Ukraine collapsing and losing that conflict. I do not think there's an inevitability to a Ukrainian loss.
And a follow-up question, and you touched on this in answers to Senator Brown's. Describe the Ukrainians' evolution of their force over the course of this conflict. My sense is they've really gone, as I think you mentioned, Minutemen with a rifle to a really serious modern military force.
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. So in the beginning, they had a certain number of organized brigades in the east. But what really kicked in was sort of volunteers who spontaneously came in, organized under officer leadership. General Syrski, north of Kiev, was key in stopping that advance toward Hostomel and then back out, pushing the Russians out of Bucha. They evolved from that. They consolidated that into Soviet-style brigades, which they were used to, with Soviet equipment. And then coming through late 22 and 23, we could see that equipment, and especially their artillery ammunition of a Soviet caliber, was going to be exhausted. And so we had to help them convert to a largely Western-equipped and almost exclusively Western artillery-equipped force, which is pretty complicated. We operate off of a different aiming circle.
They've been effective in making that transition.
It's amazing. To do that under fire, under the pressure of one of the world's largest armies, it's a fantastic feat.
In February of 22, we would not have dreamed of such a loss from Russia of tanks, would we?
We would not have. I did not anticipate the war to go this long, and I did not anticipate Ukraine to be able to destroy so much of Russia's warfighting capability.
I hope I didn't break your train of thought, so continue.
No, so as we watch the Russians, we see that their level of skill in some technical areas is very high and is evolving during the course of the war, but it's mainly isolated in specific pockets. It does not appear to be generalizable across the force, and overall the quality of their force, especially their ground force, has been decreasing throughout the conflict. On the Ukrainian side, we see sort of the opposite. We see a military that started pretty much from an almost cold start. We had been helping them before the war, but not at the scale we began to after the war, and they've evolved and developed very, very quickly. So we've learned a lot about institutional adaptation from watching both sides as well. Russians seem to be suffering from a paucity of armored vehicles and a lack of manpower. The Ukrainians on their side have assumed very strong defensive positions, well dug in, and appear to have solved some of their manpower problems that were so acute last autumn. They've increased the pool of people available for mobilization. They've increased the pool of people available for voluntary recruitment, and they've done a good job squeezing people out of headquarters to the front.
To say a word or two in half a minute about the Russian economy.
So the Russian economy has been both bolstered and distorted by this war. Specifically, the Russian government has had to turbocharge their defense sector. And in so doing, they have created a very strong inflationary pressures throughout the economy, but especially in the civil sector. They've responded to that with high interest rates to hold inflation down. The central banker, Elvira Nabiullina, has the overnight rate, the prime rate is over 21% right now. That is choking off the viability of the civil economy. So one has a huge oversized defense sector, but an anemic civil sector. And that defense sector, as you know, Chairman, is not a productive not a productive economy for the nation. It's productive for the fighting of the war, but beyond that, it has pretty much swamped things out. It appears that it will be very difficult to unwind such an imbalance, and we'll need to consider that as we go forward.
I want to give a shout out at the end to the NAFO 69 Sniffing Brigade. We made multiple campaigns with them with regards to getting the trucks to Ukrainian armed forces. It was very successful. A lot of really warm words came from the guys at the front lines, and big thank yous. And the guys from the NAFO 69 Sniffing Brigade actually made a movie, a documentary called The Land We Fight For. I will leave a link in the description, and I will call on everyone here to potentially give it a watch. They are selling like the tickets, like, and you're able to kind of get access to this. Check it out, read the description, see if this is something you might enjoy. And they're also stating that the profits from the movie will go to support the Ukrainian armed forces. So consider if this is for you. I will definitely watch it. And please know that I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.
I see you